But just the inception of the flesh-eating zombies was a pioneering kind of genre that you guys developed, you and Romero. So just tell us, more about that, how that process worked with creating the flesh-eating zombie.
Well, actually, I came up with the idea of doing a horror film as soon as we bought a 35 millimeter camera from the lab, and we bought this camera for $3,500, and nowadays cameras are self-blimped, which means that built into the camera is soundproofing that keeps the sound of the camera gears inside. But in those days, the camera was a little wee thing, and it was housed in an 80-pound blimp. And a blimp was just this huge housing that had padding inside, and the sole purpose of it was to keep the noise of the camera gears off of lip sync takes or whatever kind of take you were shooting. It was very awkward, it was very heavy. Most Hollywood movies were shot with that kind of camera, 35 millimeter Arriflex blimp, and that's why early Hollywood movies didn't have a great deal of creativity in terms of camera angles and so on, because you couldn't handhold that thing. And the tripod itself was a mammoth thing that weighed a ton. So, but we bought this camera, and I said, well, okay, all of our editing gear and mixing gear and dubbing gear, everything we had at that point was 16 millimeter. And what if we get a group of us together, say 10 of us, 5 of us at our company, The Latent Image, and then 5 close friends and associates, and we each kick in $600, we'd have $6,000, and maybe we could shoot some kind of movie in 35 millimeter black and white and print it down to 16 millimeter so we could do all our editing and mixing, and maybe we could sell off of that. Well, I was with George Romero and Richard Ritchie, and we were drinking beer and eating grilled provolone sandwiches at a little restaurant around the corner from our studio. And George says, "We're gonna make a movie!" Bang, he slams his hand on the tables and the bottles and ashtrays went flying, and all the people in there were staring at us. And because George got excited anytime there was any prospect of doing anything in the way of making movies. And Richard was very spacey, and he took a drag of his cigarette and blew out a chorus of smoke rings, and he said, "You guys are crazy." I said, "Well, do you want in or do you want out?" And he blew another chorus of smoke rings, and he said, "I'm in." So we finished having our lunches, and we went back to the studio, and Russ Streiner, we told the idea to Russ, and Russ said, "I'm in." And Gary Streiner said, "I'm in." And Vince Servinsky said, "I'm in." We only had 5 people basically working there, and plus Larry Anderson, who never really was on the same wavelength as the rest of us. And he said, "I think we should take that $6,000 and we should make a 60-second TV spot that's a real mother." And what he thought he meant was that we should just do a superb TV spot that could get us all the New York business that we weren't getting. But none of us wanted to do that. We all wanted to be feature filmmakers. Eventually, Larry left the company and wasn't part of Night of the Living Dead. So then Russ said, "Well, let me go in the office and do some figures." After a little bit, he came out and he said, "I got bad news." He said, "We can't do it for $6,000. It's going to cost close to $12,000. Well, George always just went totally in the dumps anytime there was an obstacle, and so he was just sick. And he said, "No, we can't afford to do it because even if we make the movie, there'll be no money left over for any of us to make a profit. And my uncle, Udell, who was he was a wealthy doctor that had a clinic in New York, and he said, Udell will never go along with it, and blah, blah, blah. So I thought for a little bit, and I said, okay, well, the first 6 people that come in, or the first 10 people will get 6 shares of stock for their $600, and then we're the ones that are going to make the movie or act in the movie or whatever. So then the next 10 people will get only 2 shares for their $600. So then George felt better. That's basically how we set it up. What was your question again?
I mean, you're answering some really great questions, but how the flesh-eating zombie came to be.
So George and I were the 2 writers in the group, and we toyed around with doing some kind of science fiction movie. We even had it was almost E.T. before there was E.T., because we came up with this idea about teenagers from outer space, and they're catting around the universe in their little hot rod flying saucer, and they land on the Earth and they befriend these Earth kids, and then the Earth kids have these extraterrestrial powers, and they start playing pranks on the sheriff and the townspeople and so on. And we pretty quickly found out we couldn't afford to do that. So we better backstep a few paces and go back to thinking of a horror film. And I said to George, well, whatever we do ought to start in a cemetery, because people find cemeteries spooky. And even if it's Abbott and Costello meet Dracula, for example, you see the candles moving over the coffin, and Lou Costello getting scared, and Bud Abbott being unaware of what's going on, and so on. And it's funny, but it's scary at the same time. So I started writing a thing that started in a cemetery, and it was, you see a ghoul in a cemetery, but it turns out to be a kid in a ghoul mask because it's Halloween. But these 4 or 5 kids have stolen a case of beer, and they're hiding it in the cemetery, and they get caught. And the leading kid gets grounded, and he runs away from home, and he's running through the woods, and he steps through a pane of glass, and under that pane of glass is a rotting corpse. And as he falls with his bleeding leg, he catches a glimpse of other panes of glass and other rotting corpses. So there's a whole field full of rotting corpses under glass. And my idea was that, okay, we can't afford to show saucer landings or any of that. We don't have enough money. But what if the aliens are already here and they like human flesh? And they like to have the flesh a little bit rotted. Like in the Middle Ages, when they shot a goose, they would hang the carcass up to rot for a few days before they cooked it. I guess that tenderized it. So anyway, I'm working on that, and then George came in, and he had written 20 or 30 pages of a thing that started with a brother and a sister visiting their father's grave, and then they get attacked, and the brother gets his head smashed against a tombstone, and the girl gets chased by whoever. And I read it, and I said, you know, George, this has all the right suspense and twists and turns, but who's chasing this girl? You never say. And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, seems to me it could be dead people. He said, well, that's good. I said, you know, dead people always chase beautiful women. So I said, but what are they after? You don't say that either. They don't bite, they don't claw, what? You know, he said, I don't know. And I said, why don't we use my flesh-eating idea? So he said, that's good. So that's how they became dead people after human flesh. And I thought, well, George got tied up with some kind of commercial project, some industrial film or TV spot or whatever. And I figured if we don't shoot this summer, we may never shoot our first feature film. So I just took over the script writing duties, and I rewrote what he wrote and put it in screenplay format. And then I wrote the whole second half of the script myself. And George wasn't committing, he wasn't contributing ideas, and I didn't know why. But nevertheless, I would, take charge of we had a couple script meetings, and nobody was saying anything but me. And I would say things, okay, so there has to be an escape attempt, because they have to get out of there, and if they don't, the movie's over. But the escape attempt has to fail, because if it succeeds, then again the movie's over. So we have this young couple, and we have the girl who goes catatonic, and we have Ben, our hero, and the wounded girl in the basement, and then we have the dumbass blowhard in the basement, Cooper. I never could resist saying that.
He's my favorite, though. He's my favorite. Harry Cooper.
So then, all right, in any piece of writing, and I say this in my screenwriting classes, and use Night of the Living Dead as an example because everybody knows it, and so everybody can learn from it. Night of the Living Dead is like Stagecoach with zombies instead of Indians. When you ask, like Ray Kroc, for example, when he would give lectures about McDonald's, he would say to college students or whoever, what's McDonald's business? And people would say hamburgers, cheeseburgers. Nope, it's real estate. McDonald's owns every piece of property where there's a McDonald's franchise all over the world. So what's Night of the Living Dead about? It's not about zombies. And Stagecoach isn't about Indians. It's about the plight of human existence. And especially, what are human beings, how are they going to respond in dire, life-threatening situations? Are they going to cooperate and save themselves, or are their weaknesses and their petty differences going to destroy them? Which is the same thing in the world stage right now. We have Arabs and Israelis killing each other, and on and on and on it goes. And the whole question of the human race is, are we going to overcome our petty differences and so on and find a way to survive, or are we going to destroy ourselves and the world? So that's what Night of the Living Dead is all about. In Stagecoach, you have the gunslinger, John Wayne, and you have the prostitute that he's in love with. You have the alcoholic doctor who's going to be called upon to use his talents and his specialty and overcome his alcoholism to do that. And in Night of the Living Dead, like I said, you have the young couple, empathetic young couple, you have the catatonic girl, and you have the hero Ben, and so on, and the Cooper family with their problems in the basement, and the Gulbitten girl. And are they going to pull together and survive, or are their differences going to destroy them? That's the whole issue.